I'm Rachel Whitman, 34 years old, and for most of my adult life I paid for every family dinner, every forgotten bill, every emergency they didn't want to deal with themselves. On Thanksgiving night, my sister raised her glass and said something that split the room in half. She laughed, they all laughed, and I finally saw the truth of what I was to them. Not a daughter, not a sister, just a wallet with a pulse. And by the end of dessert, they'd realize I'd stopped paying. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like the only one holding a family together. I grew up in southern Indiana, just outside Bloomington, in a quiet 3-bedroom ranch where the front porch always smelled like sun tea and the screen door never latched right. My parents, Jim and Diane, believed in working hard and keeping your head down. Mom taught elementary school for nearly 30 years. Dad did HVAC repairs. They didn't say much, but when they did, it stuck. Don't make a fuss, be useful, keep your word. My younger sister Lindsay was the loud one. From the moment she could talk, she made sure people heard her. She danced barefoot in grocery store aisles, belted out pop songs from the back seat, and declared she'd be famous by the time she turned 20. I was the opposite. I liked patterns and planning. I built a simple website for the local church directory when I was 12 and started freelancing by the time I was 16. Nobody asked me to. I just did it because it felt good to be helpful. In our house, being helpful meant being quiet. When Lindsay forgot to bring her homework, Mom would drive back to school with it. If I had a fever, I'd make my own soup. It wasn't neglect, not exactly. It was just that Lindsay sparkled louder, and I stayed out of the way. By 19, I was living on my own, supporting myself through coding contracts and working late nights for companies that didn't know I was still in college. Lindsay. She changed majors 3 times, racked up debt, and bounced from one idea to the next. A photography business, a handmade jewelry line. Then she wanted to start a podcast. Each time there was a new boyfriend, a new lease, and eventually a new crisis. And each time someone bailed her out, usually me. At first it was small things, a missed car payment, a forgotten utility bill. Then it turned into rent checks, tuition coverage, even credit card debt she didn't want Mom and Dad to see. I told myself it was temporary, that once she got on her feet, she'd take over, that she'd say thank you. But the more I gave, the less I seemed to matter. They used to call me dependable. Then it turned into detached, then cold. At Thanksgiving 2 years ago, Lindsay gave me a mug that read, CEO of Being Alone. Everyone thought it was funny. I smiled and said thank you. I always did. I wasn't trying to buy love. I just didn't know how else to belong. I covered vacations gifts, even helped Lindsay get her condo, though somehow the deed ended up only in her name. When Mom needed a new transmission, I paid the shop directly. When Dad's insurance wouldn't cover his back surgery, I made up the difference. And still, I sat on the edge of every family photo quietly. So when Lindsay stood at the head of that long farmhouse table last Thanksgiving and made her toast that cruel little joke wrapped in a smile, it wasn't the insult that broke me. It was the way nobody blinked. The room went still, like someone had shut a window and all the air left with it. Forks hung midair. A cousin's wine glass tilted, but didn't fall. No one moved, not even Lindsay. She stood frozen with her champagne flute raised, her smile stuck in place like it hadn't caught up to what I just said. To the failure who just stopped paying for everything you own. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I just said it clearly, like I was finally answering a question that had been waiting years for a reply. Then I nodded toward the restaurant manager near the door. He stepped forward quiet as a shadow holding the checkbook I'd asked him to bring. "This dinner's not on me," I added, still calm. "Not the car insurance, not the condo bills, not the family health fund. Starting tonight, it's off my books." Lindsay blinked. Dad's chair creaked as he shifted. Mom's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The cousins, the uncles, even the aunt who barely speaks at holidays, everyone stared like I'd broken something sacred. But no one spoke up. Lindsay was the first to leave. Her heels tapped across the floor, sharp and fast. A few people trailed after her. My parents hung back until the very end. I waited at the table watching the staff begin to clear the half-eaten pies and coffee cups no one touched. My fingers rested on the edge of my plate. I hadn't taken more than 3 bites the whole night. And still I paid the bill. Not because they deserved it. I just didn't want them to say I'd caused a scene over money. That was never the point. By the time I got home, the text messages were already starting. Dad, that wasn't fair, Rachel. You blindsided everyone. That's not how we handle things in this family. Mom's voicemail came next. Sweetheart Lindsay was just being playful. Don't let one moment ruin all we've built together. Let's have lunch. Just you and me. Lindsay sent 3 messages in a row. You seriously embarrassed me. Grow up. You're not a victim. Hope your money keeps you warm. I didn't respond. I opened my laptop instead, pulled up the file I'd started years ago, back when I first began helping with their bills. At first it was just a list to keep track of dates and totals, but over time the spreadsheet became something else, a record of what I gave when I gave it and what no one ever asked me about. The numbers were plain. $18,400 in rent and utilities, $11,200 in medical expenses, $9,700 in business ventures that didn't last 6 months, $6,500 in car repairs, a few thousand more across holiday trips, groceries, birthday surprises, and forgotten deadlines, nearly $50,000 in 7 years. Not including the big things, the down payment on the condo, the legal fees I covered for a mistake Lindsay once made and never mentioned again. I didn't send them a long message, just the file. Subject line, in case you forgot. The next morning, Lindsay replied with one line, Wow, you really are that insecure. Congrats. You want a medal? I didn't finish reading the rest. Mom called again that afternoon. This isn't like you, she said. You're hurt. I understand. But don't burn bridges over something said in the moment. I let it go to voicemail. 2 days later, Lindsay's boyfriend messaged me. I didn't even realize he followed me on social media. You tried to humiliate her. Hope it was worth it. And then the final straw came without warning. A shared bank account I'd opened years ago for Mom, something small just to help with household expenses, started showing activity. Charges I didn't recognize. A grocery store near Lindsay's apartment. A clothing boutique she used to tag on Instagram. A salon. A withdrawal labeled spa gift certificate. It wasn't even subtle. I logged in that night and shut down the account. Transferred the balance, closed the card, removed the linked mobile number. That was the moment it hit me. I hadn't caused a scene at Thanksgiving. I'd just stopped pretending. A week passed without calls, without explanations, without the usual text threads full of emojis and half-hearted plans. I left the group chat quietly. I didn't say anything dramatic, I just stepped out. And in the quiet that followed, something unexpected happened. I could breathe. Until one afternoon, a plain envelope showed up. Cream-colored no return address. Just my name in shaky handwriting I recognized instantly. My father's. Inside was a stack of documents and a short note clipped to the front. The handwriting was uneven, like he hadn't been sure what to say. Rachel, we've made mistakes. I've made mistakes, but you need to know what's going on. I didn't know where else to turn. Dad, that line didn't know where else to turn, hit harder than any of the messages before. I flipped through the first few pages. A joint account in my parents' names drained slowly over the past 2 years. Small amounts, then larger ones. Most of the withdrawals were labeled with a single initial L. Whitman, Lindsay, transfers through apps, ATM withdrawals, some labeled emergency. Others matched store names I'd seen on her posts. The next page showed an email between my dad and their financial advisor. The house was at risk. My childhood home, the one they told everyone was paid off, wasn't just mortgaged. They were weeks away from missing payments. Dad had written, "I didn't realize how far behind we were. I've tried talking to Lindsay. She says she's handling it. But Rachel can't know. She's done enough already." That sentence, "she's done enough already." He never said it to me. But there it was. They hadn't asked for help, not this time. But the damage had already been done. The home they built, the security they once had it, was all slipping away because they'd let Lindsay dig a hole big enough to swallow them whole. I sat in my kitchen, the documents spread across the table. The heat from my tea had gone cold. My hands didn't move, not right away, because this wasn't just about one cruel toast. This was about years of quiet sacrifice, years of being useful, invisible, and taken for granted. And now I had a choice to make: walk away completely or use what I knew to stop the damage before it spread further. The next morning I called a lawyer. What followed would change the shape of our family forever. And for the first time, I wouldn't be funding their comfort. I'd be writing the rules. I met with the lawyer on a Thursday morning. Her name was Marissa Adler. Late 40s, sharp voice, no small talk. She came recommended by a friend who'd used her during a messy business dispute. I brought everything: printouts, bank statements, the envelope from my dad, even the spreadsheet I'd emailed after Thanksgiving. She spread the papers across her desk without reacting. Just nodded as she read, flipping pages slowly like she'd seen this all before. When she finished, she looked at me and said, "What you're describing isn't just unfair, it's patterned, financially and emotionally. And you've been funding it the entire time. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to." She tapped the table with the tip of her pen. "They've learned to rely on your silence, your money, your steadiness. And if you want to stop that, we need to create structure they can't ignore." The word stuck with me. Structure. She was right. I hadn't come here for revenge. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I just didn't want to keep being the only thing propping everyone else up, especially when none of them ever looked down to see if I was still standing. So we made a plan. The house came first. The same house I grew up in, with the weathered front porch and the maple tree that dropped too many leaves in the fall. According to the documents in my dad's envelope, it was nearly underwater. They'd refinanced it twice, quietly. The latest loan was behind on payments, and if things continued, they'd lose it within the year. Marissa suggested we act quickly. We'd buy the house under a private trust. The trust would be in my name, but my parents would retain lifetime residence rights. The paperwork would guarantee they couldn't be evicted or displaced, but they also couldn't borrow against it again. If they tried, the trust would freeze and lock everything down. The next step was the debt. Credit cards, medical bills, 2 personal loans, one under my dad's name, one jointly held with my mother. I agreed to pay it all off using part of my investment income, but under one condition: every transaction would be documented. No more quiet transfers, no more whispered requests. Every payment would be signed, notarized, and legally tied to boundaries they couldn't ignore. Lindsay wasn't included. That was non-negotiable. Marissa drafted everything within a week. I reviewed it all in silence, one section at a time. Legal jargon, signature lines, disclosure pages. By the time we were done, the folder in my lap felt heavier than the one my dad had mailed. We mailed the notice the next day. Formal language, short, clear, and without emotion. You will not lose your home. You will be protected, but not in control. This is not a punishment. It is a boundary. Dad didn't reply. Mom called 3 times. I didn't pick up. Lindsay texted once. "You've lost your mind." I didn't respond. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the pull to explain myself. I wasn't cutting anyone out. I was stepping back from the middle. The documents were signed the following Tuesday. We met in Marissa's office. My parents arrived 15 minutes early, both looking thinner than I remembered. Dad wore a jacket I hadn't seen since high school. Mom's hair was pinned back like she was headed to church. There was no argument, no tears, just silence. They read every page. They asked a few questions. When it came time to sign, Mom's hand trembled slightly, but she didn't hesitate. After the last signature, she whispered, "Thank you." I nodded. There were no hugs, no apologies, just the quiet rustle of papers being tucked into folders. Lindsay didn't show up. I hadn't expected her to. That night I sat on my couch with a glass of wine and the final deed resting on my coffee table. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like something had shifted places inside me. The weight wasn't gone. It had just moved. The next day passed quietly. So did the next. I didn't check social media. I didn't ask for updates. I didn't offer any either. Then that Sunday there was a knock at the door. 3 firm raps. Not rushed. Not hesitant. I looked through the peephole. Lindsay, no makeup, baggy sweatshirt, hair pulled up, not styled. She wasn't here to perform. She was here for something else. I opened the door halfway. She didn't smile. "We need to talk." I paused, then stepped aside. She walked in like she always had, like my space was hers by default. She stood in the middle of the living room, arms folded. "So that's it," she said. "You just buy the house. Cut everyone out." I didn't answer right away. She didn't wait. "Do you even realize what that makes you look like? Like some controlling villain who thinks she can fix everything with money?" I picked up the folder from the coffee table and handed it to her. "Page 4, I said. She looked down at it, didn't open it. "I didn't know about the loan," she said. "That wasn't me." "Then explain the transfers. They're under your name." She stared at the folder like it might bite. "You could have told me," she said, quieter now. "I did," I said. "Every time I paid your rent, every time I covered your overdrafts, you just didn't hear it because I never yelled." She crossed her arms tighter. "So what now? You're done with me?" "No," I said. "You were done with me the moment you stood up and made that toast." She shook her head. "It was a joke. It was the truth I said. Yours." Her eyes were glassy, but she didn't cry. "So what now? You get to play savior and I get nothing." "No," I said. "You get to start from the ground, like I did." She blinked once, then again. "You're really cutting me off." "Not out of spite," I said. "Out of survival." She didn't argue. She just stood there a moment longer, then said, "What do I even have left?" I looked her in the eye. "Whatever you choose to build." She turned. No slam of the door, no dramatic exit, just the quiet sound of footsteps down the hall. And this time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt space. The apartment felt different after Lindsay left. Quieter, yes, but not heavy. I walked back into the living room, looked at the folder still sitting open on the table, and didn't touch it. I didn't need to. Everything in it had been said, and for once I didn't feel the need to explain what I'd done or why. 2 weeks passed without a word from her. Marissa finalized the property transfer right after the new year. The house was now legally owned by the trust with protections in place. My parents signed the documents without delay. There were no questions this time, no pushback, just initials on the margins and signatures at the bottom of each page. The notary thanked us for being organized. When it was over, Mom handed me the final signed page and said quietly, "You didn't have to do this." I looked her in the eye and replied, "No, I didn't." Then I stood, let Marissa wrap up the handoff, and left without waiting for anyone to follow. I didn't want a moment of warmth that wasn't real. I didn't want a thank you spoken just to smooth over the discomfort. I wanted distance, not punishment, just space. Within the trust, I included a small monthly stipend for my parents, enough to cover food, utilities, and medicine, but not more. No extras, no transfers, no room for misuse. I hired a third-party trustee to manage the disbursement, someone with no connection to me or them. Once it was in place, I stepped out completely. I wouldn't be the one holding the reins. That wasn't the point. 3 weeks later, I learned through a cousin that Lindsay had moved in with a friend across town. She tried working retail for a few days but didn't like the manager. Something about how he talked down to her. I didn't ask for more details. I didn't need to. That spring, a white envelope arrived in my mailbox. Just my name in neat handwriting. No return address. The postmark was from our hometown. Inside was a simple Christmas card 6 months late. No picture, no enclosed note, just one sentence written across the bottom in black pen. "We didn't deserve your grace, but thank you anyway." It was signed Mom. I sat with it for a while, not moved, not angry, just still. I placed the card in the same drawer that held my old financial records and closed it. Then I pulled on a light jacket and went outside. It was a gray day, not cold, just flat, the kind where everything seems suspended between seasons. I walked past the bakery, the barber shop, the corner store with the flickering open sign. I passed couples walking dogs, kids kicking a soccer ball in the park. No one looked at me, and I didn't look for anyone either. There was no phone call I needed to return. No text hanging in the air waiting for a reply. No background hum of obligation following me around like it always had. For the first time in years, I felt something close to balance. That weekend, I deleted the old shared calendar I used to manage birthdays, anniversaries, and family reminders. I canceled 2 scheduled flower deliveries, Mother's Day and Father's Day, and set up a new folder in my inbox labeled Personal Only. It wasn't about shutting people out. It was about choosing what came in. The shift was small at first. I stopped checking in just to smooth things over. I didn't offer to help when a cousin posted about moving. I didn't drop everything when someone called me the responsible one. Instead, I started setting my own schedule. Took walks in the mornings, cooked dinner for one without rushing, said no when a coworker asked me to cover her late shift for the 3rd time in 2 weeks. No one noticed the change right away, but I did. Conversations with my parents became shorter, polite. They called on holidays, texted every so often. The tone was different now, careful. There were no more jokes about me buying everyone's love, no more hints that I'd forgotten someone's birthday. Just civility, a strange kind of peace that didn't require fixing. Lindsay didn't reach out, and I didn't either. She'd made her choices, and now she'd live by them. One afternoon, while clearing out an old file drawer, I found a photo from a family trip years ago. All of us standing in front of the lake cabin. Lindsay smiling wide, Mom's hand on her shoulder. I was off to the side, holding the camera remote half in the frame. I looked at that version of myself, 27 years old, tired in the eyes, and quietly returned the photo to the folder. It wasn't anger I felt. It was recognition. That was the year I paid for the whole trip, and the repairs on the rental van, and the deposit on the lake house, and still, I was the one holding the edge of the picture. That night, I made a simple dinner. Roasted vegetables, grilled chicken, a glass of wine. No phone calls, no texts. Just the sound of the oven ticking as it cooled, and the soft creak of the wood floor under my chair. It was early June when I got the call. Not a number I recognized, just a local area code. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short, just a man's voice asking if this was Rachel Whitman, and if so, could I call back when I had a moment. He said his name was Tom, and that he worked over at the old flooring warehouse on Monroe Street. That was all. I sat with the phone in my hand for a minute before calling back. He answered on the second ring. "Thanks for returning my call," he said, polite but brisk. "I think I may have something here that belongs to you. or used to. I wasn't sure what he meant, but I agreed to stop by. The warehouse was tucked behind a row of shipping containers, mostly forgotten unless you knew to look. I pulled in slowly. Tom met me at the front door, gray hair, button-down shirt keys clipped to his belt. He led me through a back hallway and into a narrow office that smelled faintly of paint and old wood. There was a box on the desk, cardboard worn at the corners marked with my last name in black marker, Whitman. I didn't open it, he said, stepping aside. It came in with a batch of stuff from the foreclosure sale last winter. Property on Fairview. We just started sorting through what's left. Fairview. That was the street my parents lived on, the house I now technically owned. I opened the box. Inside were receipts, old bank statements, printouts of emails, and 2 spiral notebooks filled with what looked like notes and figures. There was also a set of apartment applications, all under Lindsay's name, with my email listed as the guarantor. I scanned through the top page. Half the references were fake. The income listed wasn't hers. My signature wasn't on any of it, but my name was. Tom cleared his throat. Figured you'd want to know. I nodded once, thanked him, and took the box home. That night, I went through everything carefully. The notebooks were hers. I recognized the handwriting. She'd kept lists of expenses, some real, some padded, notes about which cards had open balances. One page showed an estimate of how long she could keep borrowing from our parents' account without triggering overdraft alerts. None of it surprised me. What did catch my eye was a sticky note near the bottom of the box. A scribbled reminder. Ask Mom about using Rachel's trust. She won't say no if it's for them. That note sat in my palm for a long time. I didn't bring it up to anyone. The next day I contacted the trustee, asked her to double-check the access controls on the distribution system. She confirmed that everything was secure. There had been no request from anyone outside of the approved parties. Still, I added another layer in alert system. Any time someone attempted to submit paperwork or adjust beneficiary details, I'd get an automatic notification. That was the first change. The second came a week later when Mom called. Her voice was soft, slower than usual. Your sister's been having a hard time, she said. She's trying, really. She applied for a couple jobs, but it hasn't been easy. You know how things are these days. I waited. She's asked about moving back in, Mom said. Just for a little while, to regroup. We told her it's not our decision anymore, not really. But we thought you should know. I let her words hang in the air for a moment. Lindsay doesn't have rights to the house, I said plainly. That was part of the agreement. It's in writing. There was a pause. I know, Mom said. I just thought, maybe if she spoke to you. She already did, I said. At my front door. A few months ago. I didn't mean to put you in the middle, she said, even though we both knew that wasn't true. We ended the call quietly. No argument. Just silence on the other end and then the soft click of goodbye. I didn't hear from Lindsay after that, but 2 days later an email came through. Subject line, you win. No message in the body, just a blank space. I deleted it without replying. That weekend I went to the lake by myself. I hadn't done that in years, not since college. I packed a small lunch, brought a book, and sat under one of the old pines with the sun warming my shoulder. No one asked where I was. No one interrupted. No one called needing help. It was a small thing, but it mattered. That Monday, I opened a new account just for myself. I started putting money into it, not for emergencies, not for anyone else's tuition or overdue bill, just mine, a future fund, and I didn't tell a soul. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the email came through. At first, I didn't recognize the sender, just a name I vaguely remembered from family gatherings years ago. The subject line was short, almost casual. We need to talk. I hesitated before opening it. The message was from my cousin Ryan. He wrote that he'd heard some things about the trust and the house, about how Lindsay wasn't happy, that it was causing tension, and maybe I hadn't seen the whole picture. I reread the email twice, trying to decide if I should reply. Part of me wanted to delete it and move on, but something made me respond. I asked Ryan if he wanted to meet and talk in person. We met at a small cafe on Main Street later that week. Ryan looked tired, older somehow. He didn't sugarcoat it. Lindsay was struggling. She'd lost a couple of jobs, was behind on rent again, and things were worse than anyone let on. Ryan said he felt caught in the middle watching the family unravel, but unsure how to help. He asked if there was a way to soften the boundaries I'd set, that maybe we could find a middle ground. I told him the boundaries weren't meant to punish, but to protect, that the past had been too costly emotionally and financially. Ryan nodded, but said he understood Lindsay felt betrayed, that the way I'd handled things made her feel abandoned. I didn't argue. I just listened. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the city skyline beyond the window. The weight of the past months pressed on me in a new way. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about family, about love and loss, about the space between. Then came the call from Mom. Her voice was shaky, tired. She said Lindsay had left the friend's house and was now staying with someone else in a different part of town. She was scared and didn't know where to turn. I felt a tug inside me, a mixture of compassion and exhaustion. I knew what had to come next. The next day I scheduled a meeting with Marissa. I told her everything, the emails, the calls, the fear that the fragile peace we'd built was slipping away. She listened carefully, then advised we tighten the trust's terms further, add more controls, more safeguards. She also suggested involving a mediator to help the family navigate the new reality, to open lines of communication that had long been closed. It wasn't easy. I had to face that protecting myself might mean pushing others away, that the family I'd tried to hold together might fracture further. But as I sat there signing the updated documents, I understood something essential. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're lines drawn to keep everyone safe, including myself. The following week, I agreed to the mediation session Marissa suggested. It was held in a small conference room at her office, a neutral space with windows that overlooked nothing but a narrow parking lot. The table was too large for just 4 people, but it made the distance between us feel honest. Mom and Dad arrived together, their hands folded, eyes wary but not angry. Lindsay was the last to come in. She wore a plain gray sweater, no makeup, hair back in a loose knot. She sat at the far end of the table, her gaze fixed on the stack of papers in front of her. The mediator was a woman named Elaine, soft-spoken but firm. She explained that the purpose of the meeting was to lay everything out in the open, to let each of us speak without interruption. I listened as Mom described how worried she'd been, how hard it was to watch her daughters drift apart. Dad stayed quiet until asked, then spoke only to say he wished things could go back to the way they were, but he knew they couldn't. When it was Lindsay's turn, she cleared her throat and spoke in a voice I barely recognized. She said it felt like she'd lost everything at once, her home, her family's trust, the old safety net. She admitted to using the accounts, taking the money, even lying about some of the things she needed. She said she'd convinced herself it would work out because it always had. But she couldn't ignore the reality anymore. No one raised their voice. There were pauses, awkward and long, but nobody filled them with empty reassurances. When it was my turn, I explained the boundaries again. Not as punishment, not to shame anyone, but because the old way had become impossible. I told them about the box from the warehouse, the notes, the years of quiet giving. I explained that the trust was final, that my parents would never lose their home, but Lindsay would need to build something new on her own. Elaine made sure we each had time to say what needed to be said. When the meeting ended, there was no dramatic moment of forgiveness. just a sense that the truth had finally been spoken without blame, without another promise to fix what couldn't be fixed. A week after the session, my mother sent a card in the mail. Inside, she'd written only one sentence: "You gave us more than we ever saw." My father didn't call, but he sent a photograph from the backyard, the old maple in full summer leaf, the porch lights glowing at dusk. Lindsay found a small apartment. I learned through Ryan that she was working nights at a diner on the edge of town. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. She stopped reaching out, and I let her have that space. For the first time, the silence between us felt clean, not heavy. I went on with my life quietly. I cooked for myself, met friends at the coffee shop, learned to sit in the comfort of an evening without waiting for the phone to ring. It's strange how peace arrives quietly without a parade, just slipping in around the edges of your life when you least expect it. That summer, I found a new rhythm. I worked cooked meals for myself, read on the balcony in the evenings while the sun slipped behind the trees. My parents called sometimes not out of crisis, but out of habit. The conversations were shorter, softer, and we learned to share space without expectation. I'd hear from Dad about a new patch of tomatoes in the backyard, or Mom would mention a recipe she wanted to try. Lindsay stayed distant, but through the small-town grapevine I learned she was managing on her own. She picked up a second job and found an apartment with peeling paint and a view of the river. For the first time, no one asked me to step in. There were no hidden requests, no sudden emergencies, no guilt tangled in every word, just silence, and slowly that became a kind of relief. One afternoon, I walked past a family sitting outside the bakery, parents laughing, kids tugging at their sleeves. I didn't envy them. I didn't feel like a stranger in my own story. I kept walking steady on my feet and thought about the old role I used to play. For so long, I believed love meant giving, until I was empty, until there was nothing left for myself. But standing there, years older and miles from where I started, I realized that real love is sometimes quiet, sometimes fierce, but always honest. And sometimes justice means drawing a line not to keep people out, but to keep yourself whole. If I've learned anything, it's this family isn't measured by who shows up at your table when times are good, but by who respects your boundaries when you finally stand up for yourself. You can offer grace, you can forgive, but you don't have to carry what was never yours to begin with. Now my days are my own. I fill them with the people and things that bring me real comfort. I don't wait for approval or apology. I choose who sits at my table. And when people say, "But she's your sister," I just nod. I was hers too once, until I learned to be mine. Thank you for listening to my story. If it brought up something in your own life, I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments below, or just take a moment for yourself. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, you know where to find me.